It is the Nick Handley Show, episode number 4, as we have wrapped up regular season play, at least for Nebraska. Game's still going on as we're recording this right now, but a lot has happened in college football today. A lot has happened in the last couple of hours, including for Nebraska, and a very familiar thing that took place in that series with Nebraska and Iowa. I am very happy to be joined here on this particular post-game wrap of Nebraska-Iowa with Evan Bland of the Omaha World Herald. And for everybody who knows Evan's work, which is fantastic work covering football, baseball, and everything in between, people also remember back on the Nick Handley Show on 590 and even Mornings with Sharp and Handley on 1620. Evan was always a regular guest with us and with myself. So, Evan, it's good of you to join me, but I feel like we don't really need any of that getting to know each other stuff. We've been doing this for, about 6, 7, maybe even more years than that?
Yeah, I think that's about right. Episode 4, I'll hit cleanup for you. You're like,
That's right.
When you have like a hairdresser or something and they move around and like people follow them, like I'll follow you and come on wherever you are. We'll have a conversation. It'll be all good. It's worth it.
Likewise, my man. It doesn't matter where I go. I'm Evan. Hey, you got a minute, and you're always you don't always have to say yes. You're known as just one of the good guys in the business, and even if you can't make it work, you're always giving me other solutions too. Of, well, maybe not right now, but how about this time tomorrow? So you're always too good to me. You're too good to us in the radio.
Well, I think anyone who's been in the media long enough and has reached out to, say, recruits or coaches and gotten the runaround, like, you appreciate some sort of a proactive solution. So yes, or just any kind of communication. Hey, how about a response? Can you do it? Yes. Can you not do it? Well, let's find another time. I don't know. I just try to not jade other people the way that maybe some of those experiences have come back sometimes on me. So no, happy to do it.
There was one week where I felt I probably asked you to come on. I can't remember if this was at 590 or 1620, maybe twice in 1 week, because we had you on the regular topic and then something happened. Like, well, let's get Evan on, because you had written a really good story about it and you were in deep on it. And you can admit it now. I mean, we're on a podcast. Heck, we can swear if we want to. You've had to have rolled your eyes a few times when you've seen me text like, Jesus, man, I just talked to you. What the hell? What do you want now?
No, I think it's the ultimate compliment. Like, if we've done one of these for 20 to 25 minutes and you want to like dip into that thing again, like, I don't know, I take that as a compliment. What's like the etiquette in that industry? Like, if you go to somebody more than once, do you feel like you're overstepping your bounds in a week? Is the once a week, is that kind of
is it like the equivalent of when you meet a girl for the first time, back when our lives had no meaning, when we were single,
right,
as my wife likes to say, when you got the phone number, and what they always say, you had to wait 2 days. But if for people who are fans of the movie Swingers, Vince Vaughn and Jon Favreau, he said, I think 3 days is kind of money, but you had to at least wait the 2 days. So I feel like, that's like the equivalent of a week. If I bother you more than once a week, then you're going to feel like I'm putting too much pressure on you in this relationship, and I'm going to come across as clingy. I think that's how it goes down.
Yeah, it's you're staring at your phone and you're saying, I'm not going to call. I'm not going to call. You're setting your alarm. All right, now I'm going to call. And the other piece of it, and so I'm not in radio. I'm on the writing side. But like, when you ask somebody to be a weekly guest, is that like the equivalent of going steady?
Yeah.
At that point,
Totally.
You're making kind of a commitment there. Mm-hmm. Like, this isn't a one-time thing. And I know too, when I'm kind of like the rebound guy, like, I'm not a weekly guest, but they call me up enough times where it's like, we're interested, but we're not ready to make that full commitment.
You're the good time then.
You're feeling that on the other side as well.
That means you're the good time. That's what that means.
That's right. Not going to put a ring on it, but we'll go out and make some memories.
Always going to keep it close. I don't even know how we transition, but we got to have some laughs, because we got to do the postmortem on this thing that happened yesterday. And I know for so many people that are watching and listening to this, they had so much deja vu. And I want to start with this. You're there. You're in Iowa City. You're watching this thing unfold. The defense is just absolutely dominating. And the offense, even despite the points, it was moving the football. It was clicking, I would say, more times than not, at least in the first half. When you're watching this, are you thinking, when's the other shoe going to drop? Or are you thinking, damn, they just have Iowa's number tonight?
I was down on the sideline in the last 2 or 3 minutes, and I think in real time it was like 15, and it felt like 30 because of the temperature. But I turned to Sam McEwen next to me, and I was just like, I think Nebraska is going to get it done tonight. Like I really thought that when they had the ball and they were driving close to midfield, that something positive was going to happen. They were just playing so well in so many phases. I mean, essentially there was one poor defensive play on that Caleb Johnson long pass touchdown. The offense, it left some meat on the bone, but I thought it was pretty strong. And really more than anything, I thought both lines, Nebraska's offensive and defensive lines, generated steady pushes against Iowa. And we haven't seen that in a long time where, I mean, they were just moving their guys back on either side of the ball. And it just felt like, man, this is the time when they are going to actually win one of these things. But too many special teams errors. And that always seems to happen against Iowa, whether that was a blocked punt in recent years or the kickoff return. Obviously, they make field goals. You look at the starting field position, and Nebraska's starting drives on their own 22. Iowa's at its own 37. And you could just kind of see the field position tilting. But despite all that, I did think Nebraska was going to get it done. And then some really uncreative, football gods writer dials up the exact same script as last year. Untimely turnover. Iowa drives down, kicks a field goal in the final seconds. It's tired. People have seen it before, but it doesn't hurt any less. I think Nebraska genuinely felt like they were the better team. I think they were the better team for the majority of that game. And ultimately, they're left trying to reconcile how they didn't get it done.
I don't even know why I thought this. The second attempt, the attempt that actually counted by Drew Stevens. So you were on the field. I don't know the type of angle that you had. On TV, though, it looked like that thing was heading right to the upright. And you never know if it's going to clank in or if it's going to doink off or out. I'm thinking for a moment, and I almost had to slap myself in the face for even thinking this. I think he's going to doink this because it's heading that way. And then it just makes it inside. It's almost like just to twist the knife a little bit more that it looked like, oh, you thought for a second this thing was going to clank off. We're going to go to overtime. And that would have been another thing if they go to overtime. I don't even know if you wanted to go through that again because they have not scored in overtime. Although it would have been the last time and the last place that they scored was in Iowa City back in 2014. It was just, Evan, everything about it was all too familiar. But I brought up the 2021 Michigan State game. The reason it reminded me a lot of that is because of the defensive domination against an elite running back. Caleb Johnson, very similar to what Kenneth Walker was doing for Michigan State that year too. Nebraska did everything in that game defensively to win it. And yet we remember the punt return. Weird. A special teams play that goes bad, kicked to the wrong side of the field. That gets returned for a touchdown. Yardage was similar of what Iowa got last night compared to what Michigan State got in 2021. I mean, there was a lot of similarities. So I know everybody's saying, they're remembering the turnover last year against Iowa that led to the game-winning field goal. And that's fair. I get it because you see these two teams play and it comes down to that. But that game to me reminded me a lot of 2021 Michigan State.
I said the same thing coming back from Iowa City for the same reasons. It really felt, Caleb Johnson has been the nation's number 2 rusher this year. He's been the Big Ten's leading rusher. And you just look at how he's operated, and he's got that low center of gravity. He can make guys miss. He can shed tacklers, and then he can hit the home run ball, so to speak, too, and break away and do what he did. And Nebraska, they gave up the 1 11-yard run in the first half, and that was the only first down Iowa had in the first half. And they're filling gaps and they're making tackles. And Malcolm Hartzog had this stop of him where he just kind of went for the feet and just tripped him up. And it was like, dang, that was a really impressive play. And he just gets nothing going. And the one play that he breaks, I think Nebraska would say that they misplayed it as much as anything, where Ty Robinson's colliding with Deshaun Singleton and they're knocking their own guys off. And that was the only way he got any kind of traction. So it's one thing to lose the game and be like, man, we made some mistakes, and certainly they did. But especially if you're on that defense and if you're one of those handful of seniors that came back for a 5th or 6th year, and you play like you played in Iowa City on Friday night, and your lasting memory is watching this swarm of black and gold run over to the Heroes Trophy while you're freezing your butt off walking off the field. I mean, that sucks. That's you talk about twisting the knife. Like, how do you figure that out? I don't think those guys, outside of generating some takeaways, which they didn't have any, there's really nothing more they could have done in that game. And so an ultimate disappointment. Big picture, certainly I think there's an encouragement side of this thing, because they have been a little bit up and down this year as a unit. So they ended strong in that fashion. They can continue that into a bowl game. But man, they did everything you have to do, I think, offensively too and defensively, to beat Iowa, and it still wasn't enough.
And you're left with frustration because Nebraska's that close to finishing strong on a 2-game winning streak, to exercise the demon of getting the 6th win and beating Wisconsin and breaking that losing streak, and then to have a chance to do it again in Iowa City after they did it 2 years ago. I think this program would have been flying high into the bowl game. I'm really interested to see, Evan, how the response, what it looks like, what this group is able to do, because as excited as they are to be in a bowl game, and as excited as I think the fans were a week ago too, just judging by a lot of the interaction from a lot of people that are watching and listening to this right now, I saw one person saying, unfortunately, the season has to continue because we have to go to a bowl game. Now, I don't think that's representing the majority of Nebraska fans. I think they're still going to take that 6th win, what they got against Wisconsin, but it did leave you kind of flat where, yeah, you're happy that they're going to a bowl game, but now you're going into it with that sickening feeling that you had a game. And we could say this so many times about this program, especially in this game. Their response to me, Evan, I think is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, it is. And had they won, I think it would, their improvement through November would have been obvious. Like from where the month started against UCLA to where it ended up, I think you would have said, wow. I mean, they made some big improvements. The Dana Holgorsen experiment worked well. The defense ended on a strong note. They won more games in November than they have in like 6 or 7 years. And I still think that's true. I still think that this Nebraska team has improved more in the month of November and has more momentum in that month, probably since Scott Frost's first year in 2018, in my opinion. But now it is a little more muted. You have to kind of squint a little more to see it amid the loss. And so the next couple weeks are interesting in the sense that, like, if this was a game to go to a bowl, I mean, then this thing festers for a whole off season, and this is where you get things like Chasing 3 documentaries. If there were a game next week, you can shake it off, and goodness knows Nebraska's got experience doing that. And they're kind of in this interim space now where you have a week where you don't even know who your next opponent's going to be. And so I think you're gonna stew on that for a little while. It's sort of like a bye week, I think, where you have a loss like that, and you just have to kind of let it fester, and then they come back. And I think it's, part of the culture of Matt Rule has been like, make it about the football, make it about the tape. Yeah. And I do think when they look back at the tape, there's going to be a lot of good stuff that they can take from that. And I think it keeps you dialed in on the process and less about sort of these existential things like, oh my gosh, we're cursed. And why does this always happen against Iowa and things like that? So it does feel like kind of another one of those culture moments where, how locked in are they going to be for a bowl game that ultimately, is sort of meaningless beyond off-season momentum, finishing with a winning season, losing season, kind of minor motivators. But if your motivation is the pursuit of greatness and that internal sort of fire that I think the best teams have, then that's going to be, to me, a good sign that this team's continuing to build towards something greater next year.
Evan, I know one of the defining moments of that game is going to be the strip sack on Dylan Raiola. It's hard for me, though, to not look at, in the short time that Dana Holgorsen has been with Dylan, especially, that there's chemistry there. And in part because of, I think there's that trust level that Dylan has with Dana Holgorsen, but I think also that's spilling over to the offense. I get it. Hey, 10 points. Not a lot. The total yardage, everything, even though it was greater than Iowa's, it wasn't that much. But when you watch that offense, I've been saying this for 2 months now, want to see this offense operate with more of a sense of urgency. That doesn't always mean tempo. but also that starts with the quarterback, how he's processing, how he's getting them to the line of scrimmage, and then what he's doing with the football and how quickly he's getting rid of the football. There were moments that he was under duress, but again, I just feel like there is something there with those two. And it would be a damn shame to see him all of a sudden have to get readjusted to a new offensive coordinator. I think despite the loss and really a 1-2 showing now with Dana Holgorsen as the OC, maybe I'm seeing something different. I like the way the running backs are being used, but more importantly, with number 15, him being the future of this program, I think they finally got that combination right. That I know it's a small sample size, but I like the way that he's processing now. And it's weird because it seems like it's really clicked back in after he was slumping now with Dana Holgorsen.
Yeah, if this season were like a season of a television show and Dana Holgorsen was like the guest star in the last couple games, I think he's earned a role in the main credits for next year. I want to see what a Dylan and Dana show looks like over a full season. And a lot of the stuff that you said, I noticed as well, Nick, when you talk about just getting the ball out quicker. Like 2 months ago, I think there were a lot more deep passes that Raiola was attempting. And this time it was, one Mississippi, two Mississippi, get the ball out on a screen, or I think his ability to read checkdowns has improved. It just feels like he's been in more of a rhythm. I mean, he was above 70% passing for most of this month with what he was doing, getting the ball to playmakers in space. I think all that works. And then the personnel piece, I don't think you can overlook either. I mean, what Emmett Johnson was able to do with Holgorsen vouching for him as that lead guy. We saw them spread out the targets to more tight ends. Nate Borgerture certainly looked the part. Even when Thomas Fidone had his opportunities, I thought he was a little bit better, especially against Iowa last week. So all that, I think, factors in. Some of the play calls have been more suited to what Nebraska does well. That's the other thing Holgorsen and Matt Rhule have talked about, is just this idea that, hey, if you have a big playbook because you have so many influences from all these different coaches. And Holgorsen said, hey, if you can't do it in practice, we're going to trim it down. And I think we saw a lot of that where he's thinking less. Guys are moving around into different positions less. Ja'Cory Barney, has been more of a slot guy. Like, they haven't moved him around and been as cute with him in different spots. And so if Nebraska can do that in a month and essentially make that adjustment in a bye week in November, what could a whole offseason look like with Holgorsen tinkering and Raiola and him getting on the same page and whatever they do in the portal and however some of the younger guys develop. Like, it's compelling. It's interesting. I think it's why Matt Rhule has already openly said he would like Holgorsen back next year. And there are a lot of to-dos in the offseason, even before the bowl game. And I think one of them, if you can do it, is you certainly got to try to lock up Holgorsen for a year or two. And what his opportunities are, what his ambitions are, remain to be seen. But it's clearly Nebraska wants to keep him around, and we'll see if he returns the sentiment for another year or two.
Evan, I want to go back to that 72-yard touchdown pass to Caleb Johnson. Initially and rewatching it, I still think a lot of people are going to focus on John Bullock, who was engaged with him. It almost reminds you a little bit about the 96 Fiesta Bowl and Tommy Frazier running through the state of Florida, where you wonder how the hell did he scored out of there, because guys were kind of grasping at him, but that no one would take him down. And I know that's John Bullock looks like he's that guy that just couldn't get him down. You mentioned earlier, and Ty Robinson spoke of it as well, on how he tried to kind of blow the thing up and it maybe hurt them. And there were moments before John Bullock engages with Caleb Johnson that those plays could have been made. It was hard for me not to think back to the last time Nebraska was in Iowa City. And if you think back to just recent games between these two teams, if you have a playmaker, that's typically been the difference. I think of Trey Palmer. No, Trey Palmer was the best player on the field. And Iowa was down a couple of members of the secondary, but Trey Palmer was that playmaker that, as long as Casey could get it to him, and he did, then he was going to be the difference. This game, Caleb Johnson, even though he was being bottled up the entire time, they have a playmaker. And Nebraska just doesn't have that elite playmaker. And in that moment where you see a defense is just playing their nuts off in this scenario, but has that one moment where they don't tackle well, that's where these playmakers in this series especially come through. And I just want to know your thoughts on that play, but also the lack of playmakers. But when there has been one, they typically have been the difference in this series.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the way I kind of look at it is it gives you a margin for error. So like the best teams in college football, they can play at something of like their B game, and still win. And Nebraska can't really do that. They can maybe play a B+ game, but they can't get much worse than that, or they're probably not going to win because they don't have the talent, the dudes, the playmakers, whatever you want to call it, to make up for that. And so, it's kind of the same discussion that Nebraska's had for a long time, where it's like, where are the dudes? And they hope they can find those in recruiting. They hope they can find them in the portal. That it's incredibly hard to do that. It's competitive. Now it costs you money to do that. And you have to pair that with all the other stuff, the scheme, the development, the off the field, academics and the other selling points that go into it. But yeah, I mean, these are the kind of games where that absolutely shows up, because outside of Ty Robinson, I don't know that you would say Nebraska's defense has a lot of star power. I think they have a lot of solid guys who are veterans and know what they're doing in the system. But it's frustrating because you're right. Like they just, from a star perspective, Iowa had the guy, Caleb Johnson.
Yeah.
Nebraska didn't have the guy. Offensively, I will say from the Iowa people that I talked to, they were incredibly impressed with Raiola. They said that guy is a quarterback, man. They said we'd kill to have a guy like that with an arm like that in Iowa City. So I think they recognize there's something there long term. And so, like, to me, that sets up a really, really interesting offseason when you talk about the portal, especially where it's like, in addition to all the things that Nebraska can usually offer, now they can also say, you want to play with Patrick Mahomes Jr.? As Iowa kicker referred to him last. What's that like? Like you can play with this guy. Maybe you can play with Holgerson calling plays as well. So we saw a year ago Raiola was really involved in the portal recruiting and even high school recruiting. How much more so is that going to be? How much swagger? How much cachet will he have now after a year of tape to show what these guys can do and what that next step's going to be? So I agree. Like it feels like maybe they're a little bit short in playmakers, especially on that offensive side. How they address that with some of the pieces they have in place is going to be a really interesting storyline in the next couple of months.
Well, I don't want to say you have to point the finger here, but that was a huge play. Is it just as simple as you got to take the guy down? Whether somebody comes into the pile and kind of knocks you off him or not, you're kind of dancing around with the guy. You got to take him down. I know there's been a lot of excuse making on, and I understand what Ty Robinson was trying to say, but maybe I'm being too harsh on this. I don't buy that. You bring up a great point there, Evan. When the margin for error is so slim and you're able to sniff that play out and you don't do it, this is the history of this series. This is the history of Nebraska losing close games, that it's that one time that you don't do your job or you don't do something that has been just absolutely ingrained into your mind of being a better tackler than what you saw in those moments. And I don't want to put it just on Bullock, because there are other guys who whiffed on that play, of how just amplified that moment was there for Nebraska.
Yeah, I mean, it was because of what we just said. Like they weren't able to make up for it elsewhere because there was a low snap on a chip shot field goal that led to a miss, and these other factors that played into it. So yeah, that's the one play, the highlight play. I just don't feel like I can be very critical because of what the defense did on every other play. I mean,
it's tough to do it. You're right. It's tough to do it.
And the mistakes didn't come from like arm tackles or lack of effort. They came because you didn't get a guy who's been a beast in the Big Ten all year, and because there were some flukish sequences on the back end that were born out of effort and about guys trying to make that play. So it happens. But again, if if Ohio State's defense made that play defensively or didn't make that play defensively, you can bet that they're still going to find a way to make up for that and to come back, right? Like the old baseball adage of like, pick your guys up if you make a mistake. And Nebraska just hasn't been able to do that very well. If they play well, they can lean on their defense and have a chance. And otherwise, it's just been hard for them to kind of help each other out and pick up that slack. I think that's a great example of that, where, that's a night where special teams needs to do something, where the offense needs to break one loose and maybe finish in the red zone to get you back. And it doesn't happen. And so the defense has to wear that. But man, I think I was so impressed by how they handled most of the night, even against an Iowa offense that was as one-dimensional as they had to be, given their personnel, that, I just chalk that up to, you need some of your other guys to step up and play some complementary football.
Yeah. And if we're being fair too, you're right about the offense. I know earlier the miss on Jalen Lloyd in the first half, and Dylan, this has been a problem with Dylan a little bit. And this is a big part of the offseason. He is going to have a major offseason on just tightening some things up, but especially the open receivers. But I think to the transfer portal and the situation that I thought Nebraska was in when they get guys like Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nayor, thinking this is great. This is how you support a true freshman quarterback. You're getting some experienced guys that can make plays. Isaiah Nayor, you got to make that play. You've got to catch that football. I mean, that to me, that's inexcusable. And again, these are the moments that we're talking about. I want to get to special teams here in a moment, because that, I think, leads into a very interesting discussion that we might be, if Matt Rule sees a problem with the offense and did what he did by bringing in Dana Holgorsen, what is he going to do with special teams? If people think he's loyal to his boys, not so fast. But the Isaiah Nayor, going back to playmakers, going back to how important it is to get things right in the offseason, because in moments like that, you want to know you have that guy that is going to be that difference maker, that even if he's been bottled up all game, you get him the ball on a great route and a very good throw. It was that thing has to be caught. It absolutely has to be caught. It was a great throw, and it's as if he never even saw it. It goes right through his hands. To me, those moments in that part of the game too are inexcusable, and unfortunately, we've seen it with this offense. This goes back even before Dylan Raiola was the quarterback.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think about the near upset at Ohio State in 2018 when J.D. Spielman has a sun ball and doesn't make the catch, and like all kinds of moments, individual moments like that. So like, it's kind of the two-sided thing where on the one hand, you need your guys to make the routine plays, the balls that are in your hand, make those catches. But then the other part of it, and the best teams have this, is the guys who make the really impressive individual efforts. And I thought we saw a little bit of that, like the Jamal Banks play on the sideline where he goes out full extension and grabs the ball. I think it was on third down. Like, that was a moment where you're like, wow, that was just a great individual effort. And they got it done and moved the chains. And so like, when you have guys like that, suddenly the onus is less on the scheme and having to execute things perfectly. And it's more, okay, hey, there is a scheme, but now we just know this guy's going to make a play. More often than not, like the percentage play is this guy's going to get it done. And I don't know how many guys Nebraska has in that circle of trust right now, where Nayor he's had a few moments this year. I think Banks has had a few moments this year. Ja'Cory Barney's probably been their most explosive playmaker, most exciting guy. I think you probably maybe trust him the most out of any of these guys to go out and do what he does. But that's kind of the thing, is like, you have a plan, and now go let your guys be guys and just know that when the spotlight comes on, they're going to handle it. And that's been wobbly for Nebraska. They have a little bit of that. They don't have a little bit of that. You just don't know what to expect from series to series. And Iowa, as unspectacular as their offense is predictable. And you know that Caleb Johnson's going to make a play, and you know that they're going to stick to what they do. And so like, their floor is higher and Nebraska's floor is a little lower. And in games like this, I mean, that's where some of these just tight differences come in. So Nebraska's always aimed higher. I appreciate that about them. Like, they don't want to settle for like 7 or 8 wins. They're always looking higher. But I think with that has come sort of this roller coaster effect where you just don't know what to expect from series to series or game to game. And that's just no way to consistently build a winner.
Special teams, Evan, it's It's just it is. We got to say what it is, and at times, and I'll give John Hole some credit. He stabilized a lot of parts that just made you want to absolutely puke when you watched the special teams operation. So good on John Hole. He wasn't making that field goal. Hell, Sebastian Janikowski. Yeah, I went there. Kevin Butler, one of my favorite all-time Chicago Bear kickers. Robbie Gold. They weren't making that kick because the snap was garbage.
Yeah.
I don't blame Brian Buschini for not being able to handle that thing, but when John Hole kicks it, everybody saw it. The ball is at a slant. So even if your holder is able to be a good shortstop in that situation and still place it upright, he wasn't able to do that correctly. The kick was bad. The person that I blame the least on that is John Hole. Unfortunately, if it's one of those things that just happens in the worst moment, and that was the only time this year, okay, it's just really bad luck. This is something that somehow was masked a little bit over the last couple of weeks. You thought, okay, maybe they figured things out. It's there again. Then, of course, yes, it wasn't even a muff punt. It was a ball that was touched because it didn't need to be, because the communication was down. Evan, it's the operation. It's the operation. It's the communication of the entire special teams unit. And it's hurt Nebraska in so many different phases that I get it. You can't put it all on a special teams coach because there are certain things where you have to hold the players accountable. But at some point, you got to say, hey, who is leading this? Okay, it ain't working. We love you, but we've got to move on. And I bring that up because people knew the hot topic was offense, and it had no flow whatsoever. And even the players that needed to take the accountability on not doing their part, there is someone that is responsible. It's making a lot of money that has to get things right. It has to be able to get through to those guys and has to be able to allow them, put them in the position to be successful, but also hold them accountable too, to where those things don't happen again. And you saw they go the very unconventional route of bringing in Dana Holgorsen. What is going to happen to Ed Foley and what is going to happen with the special teams, I think, is the next big what to watch for here, even before the bowl game.
I agree. I mean, and I think it's because of what we've seen, how Matt Rule addresses deficiencies within the program. I mean, you think about a year ago, and the turnover margin was atrocious, especially the giveaways. And so they made major efforts in the offseason to correct that. And they still finished, I think, -2 in the regular season, but it sure as heck is a lot better than, -18 or whatever it was a year ago. And so and Matt Rule has made the analogy this season about kind of the whack-a-mole approach where, hey, right now this issue crops up and boom, you hit that thing and you fix that. And then something else pops up and boom, you got to fix that. We saw the biggest mole pop up with the offense, and he came at that thing with a mallet, and Holgorsen comes in, very unconventional move. I can't think of another modern precedent for bringing a guy in from outside the program. And in hindsight, it may very well have earned them that win over Wisconsin. It's possible that they don't win that game otherwise. And then, so Nebraska takes a step potentially because of this bold move that Rule made. So I think it is fascinating because objectively you look at special teams and it's been poor all year. I mean, Hole, as you mentioned, was a bright spot. He made 9 field goals at one point. He wasn't supposed to be the kicker this year. That was going to be Tristan Alvano, but he got hurt. Brian Buschini has been, I think he'll be an NFL guy. I do. But he had a couple shanks even on Friday night, one into the stands, kind of a Caleb Lightborn flashback from a few years ago. And not only Nebraska, Nick, but I think when you compare it in that game to what you saw from the Iowa side, that's where you really saw how far they have to go. Because Iowa, I mean, they're just so sound. And yeah, you talk about them losing on a last-second field goal for the 4th time in 7 years. Well, it was a different kicker who did it this time. And it was a different punter than they've had in the past, and he was solid. And they have a good return game, and they take advantage of these mistakes that Nebraska has. Every fair catch, it was just like you're holding your breath, wondering what's going to happen. And so, some of it feels like it's bad luck, but it's really just being coached up really well to know all the situations. Iowa did get bailed out on that one kickoff to the goal line where the returner, corralled it in the end zone and they counted a fair touchback. But that was, other than that, they were extremely sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, I think that's something you have to look at in the offseason. And Nebraska is going to have to address the specialists too. I mean, you're moving on from Brian Buschini, so maybe you go to the portal for a punter unless you feel like Camden Cook potentially is that guy. Do you move forward with John Hull, or what happens with Tristan Alvano? There's just a lot of questions to be addressed. And when you talk about chasing three, I think that applies as much to special teams as it does any of the other units right now, just with field position and everything else. I mean, again, Iowa started its drive on average 15 yards better than where Nebraska did. And that was mostly just because of sound special teams plays. So how do you fix that? Maybe that does start at the coordinator position. I think that's something you have to look at. And we'll see if Matt Rule goes that direction with a guy in Ed Foley, who's been with him for the majority of his coaching career.
It is amazing. This was brought up by Mike Schaefer during the game, and I thought he was spot on. And as the game continued to unfold, you're thinking, man, that's true. How many times have we watched Iowa, Nebraska, where the Iowa punting operation getting Nebraska inside the 5, as opposed to Nebraska, which you think, all right, they're getting the opponent inside the 20. Those things just right there in the punting game of where they're pinning Nebraska compared to where Nebraska's pinning Iowa. And for a lot of these games, we've seen the offenses very challenged. And so that just maybe 10 or 15 yard difference and where they are starting their drive has been monumental in this series. And it showed itself again yesterday too, with two offenses that were struggling to move the football.
Yeah, for sure. And when you have a freshman quarterback and you're making a coordinator change, or you're struggling in that role, like, you need those other guys to pick you up, kind of like we were saying earlier. Like, then that's when you need your defense to give you a short field. That's when you need your special teams to get a return and get you out to midfield. That's when you need a playmaker to just make a play in space and do something. And so you can maybe enjoy a 3-play, 75-yard touchdown drive as opposed to needing to string together 10 plays. And it just feels like it's been hard. Like, they haven't ever been able to just kind of get easy points and do it quickly. Like, it just feels like they have to do a bunch of things right. And if they make one mistake or two mistakes, then you're behind the sticks and things don't work out. And special teams is certainly a part of that. Like, it's hard enough to score if you just simply fair catch and start from your own 25, let alone trying to return it and getting out to the 18 or getting pinned inside the 5 because your guy fair catches it. Like, there's just so many of those little things that add up. And I think it's even more accentuated in modern college football, Nick, when you look around in this 18-team Big Ten, and there's this huge bloated middle class of like 5, 6, 7 win teams. And every single week comes down to the last drive. And every single week is about one play that was made here, or a turnover there, or a penalty. I mean, it's just, you can't just rely on talent and sort of have this margin. Like, you have to play at a higher level. And just some of the deeper stuff Nebraska struggled with for so long. And there's no reason to think they're going to start winning some of these close games until you start addressing it.
No, you're absolutely right. Evan, before I let you go, and I'm watching what happened with Michigan and Ohio State. And I get it, that game, the emotion, you completely throw out how each team is trending. But the fact that Michigan goes in there and wins that game, Syracuse taking down Miami, you're hopeful that with this new day and age of college football, that parity, it's there. We see it almost on a weekly basis where teams that are unranked that are going into top 10 teams' houses and defeating them. Nebraska almost did that against Ohio State, but I say almost because they didn't do it. You're hoping that's coming. I want to end on this one because this obviously got a lot of run. It was a big talking point. You mentioned the little Patrick Mahomes. There was a lot of trash talking going on afterwards from Iowa because of the coin flip and the captain's meeting at center field, at midfield, where Nebraska opts not to shake hands with Iowa. I get it. This is a rivalry. I would say this: if you're going to go that route, if you're going to be the bad boy, and you're going to punk the other team, you sure as hell better win. Not a good look, in my opinion. Not a good look at all. I know a lot of people are saying, "Who cares?" They hate each other. They're pissed off. Do they need to be hugging each other before the game? That's fine. If you want to, I'm just saying, if you want to go that route, you sure as shit better win that game.
No doubt. I'll be fascinated I wasn't really aware of that immediately post game. And I'll be fascinated to hear from Rule and some of those guys about how premeditated what that was, if that was condoned, approved, whatever. I personally wouldn't have gone that route. Like, I think, sportsmanship is kind of what it is. What's the harm in shaking a guy's hand, even if you hate him on the inside? Like, put on, kill him with kindness, right? Like, that's, I kind of like that approach. Like, lull them into this sense of security. Like, yeah, we're good. And then they go out there and they slobber knock you on the field. So one, it riled up Iowa, clearly. I mean, that was something that those guys talked about openly after the game as a motivator. And then, you can get in the conversation about, like, hey, kids are watching this. And so do you want to, is that something that you would encourage your own son or daughter to do, to snub somebody in the handshake line before or after? And I get there's a history there too, but it was a risk Nebraska took. They felt strongly about it. Had they won, I don't know that we would have heard much about it. I don't know that Iowa talks about it if they win. I don't know that Nebraska cares at all if they win. They didn't. So that was a gamble that didn't pay off. I don't know that that's something you want to make a habit of. Hopefully that's sort of a mark of this rivalry. And maybe that's the silver lining, Nick. You think about when Nebraska joined the Big Ten, and this was sort of a rivalry that was forced upon both sides, when they're like, I don't know, whatever, sure. I guess our states border each other. That's fine. We can talk about the 2000 game or whatever. But I mean, there's legitimate hate on both sides now. So maybe we can just embrace the fact that these teams really do not care for each other to the point to where they're going to, deny shaking hands, and Iowa's best defender is going to go over and seek out Matt Rule for a handshake. Like, it's uncomfortable in a sense, but it's also kind of why we love the sport and love the rivalry too. So, these guys are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids who are having a good time, and ultimately let it play out on the field. Nebraska didn't play dirty. They didn't commit a bunch of penalties or late hits. Like, I think they played within the confines of the game, and that was just their little extra something, and it just didn't work out for them.
Evan, you've been more than gracious with your time tonight. I really appreciate it. So you mentioned that's one thing you're following this week is the response from a little bit of the trash talking and what happened as well. What are the big things, the big topics this week, the big ticket items right now as we now go into kind of an interesting time in bowl prep, but also a big recruiting time, a big roster assessment time, and possibly personnel changes as well. What are the things that you expect to get this week?
Well, I mean, early signing days earlier this year. I don't know that a lot of people maybe remember that. Instead of mid-December, it's now Wednesday. So they sign on the 4th, and I think they're as we're recording this, at 19 commits. That's probably going to hit 20 or 21 if they can flip another guy or two. So these next couple of days will be about finishing out that class strong. And then, I think they'll probably start bowl practice in the middle of this week at some point. And then, of course, next weekend or next week is when the portal opens on the 9th. And so obviously Nebraska will be in the market to make some additions, but very much so they're going to lose between probably 40 and 50 players. When you talk about trimming the roster, they're now at above 150. They got to get down to 105. So a friendly reminder to anyone listening, it's not an indictment on the program or people wanting to get out or the culture's poison. It's quite literally a numbers game where they have to trim these guys so that they can go play elsewhere and Nebraska can hit a number. So all that's in play. Potential coaching tweaks, maybe a Dana Holgerson decision. We're about a week away from learning who Nebraska's bowl opponent is going to be and what its destination is. So the regular season's over, but it feels like it's just getting started, both with how they cap off the season in the postseason, and then also how they start reconstructing things for next year.
Yeah, it's been wild, and it will get a little bit crazier here in these next couple of weeks. Evan, awesome stuff as always, man. Really appreciate you jumping on. I'm sure we will be talking soon again and crossing paths before we know it, but always appreciate everything you bring to your writing. And you're a podcaster too. I watch you and Sam and Tom, so you're a pro at this. You're part of the radio guys.
Well, I don't know if I'm any radio guy, but I'll moderate and do some traffic control and that sort of thing. But no, I appreciate you having me. And one of the great things about this time and age is the technology that allows all these great opinions and insights to be out there. So anyone who's thirsting for Nebraska content such as this, they're probably not looking hard enough. So no, thanks for having me, and we'll do it again.
All right, my man. Be well. Happy holidays to you and your family, and we'll talk soon.
Appreciate it, Nick. You too.
All right, this week, as Evan said, there's a lot going on, and we'll be on top of that. I keep saying it's me now, talking about that. And also my good buddy out in Chicago, Carmen DeFalco of ESPN 1000, he promised me he would talk a little Matt Eberflus, and the Bears looking for a new head coach too. So if you're a Bears fan, we'll probably mix a little bit of that in this week as well. Yeah, if you're a Bears and Nebraska fan, this was not a good week. It's not been a really good year. At least one team is going to the postseason. The other, there's no chance in hell for that. But we'll have all week to be talking about that. Look for the next Nick Handley show coming up this week as we get into conference championship weekend as well. Until then, appreciate you listening. Appreciate you watching. We'll talk to you soon.